What if society wasn't designed by popularity, or by who can win the most votes? What if it were designed by pure, unadulterated reason, by people with this profound, almost perfect knowledge of what is truly good and true? Just imagine a world where leaders are chosen not for their charisma or their ability to sway public opinion, but solely on their wisdom and understanding. Welcome to The Deep Dive. This is where we take your sources, everything from cutting-edge research to classic texts, plus our own notes, and we really try to extract the most fascinating, most important nuggets of knowledge and insight. Today, we're plunging headfirst into the profound, and let's be honest, often controversial world of Plato. He is undoubtedly one of the most influential philosophers in Western history. Our sources, they range from really in-depth academic journals to comprehensive encyclopedic entries, and they paint this remarkably detailed picture of his magnum opus, the Republic, and its enduring, sometimes quite surprising, impact on philosophy, society, even pop culture. So our mission today is to explore Plato's radical vision for political power, the intricate structure of his ideal state, and the deep philosophical underpinnings that make his ideas both timeless and, well, intensely debated even now. Get ready for some serious aha moments, because we're about to unpack some foundational concepts that still really echo, in our world today.
Indeed. It's quite a journey into the mind of a thinker whose ideas, well, they lay the very groundwork for so much of what we understand about philosophy, ethics, politics, you name it. And you'll see how his responses to these really fundamental questions about justice and governance, they continue to resonate, often in really unexpected ways. They kind of force us to re-examine our own assumptions about leadership, about truth.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning with the man himself. We're talking about Plato, but he wasn't just, a philosopher cloistered away somewhere. Our sources tell us he was a central, really dynamic figure in ancient Greece. He lived through some pretty tumultuous times, and that profoundly shaped his thinking. He was a direct student of the enigmatic Socrates, and himself the mentor to another titan of thought, Aristotle. And what's truly remarkable, I think, is that he founded the academia in Athens around 387 BC. Now, that's not just a school, it's widely considered the very first institution of higher learning in the Western world.
Yeah, think about that for a second. The whole concept of a university, a structured place for advanced intellectual pursuit, it arguably begins right there with Plato. It was a groundbreaking idea, really, establishing this dedicated space for rigorous philosophical and scientific inquiry that went way beyond just casual discussion.
Right, and understanding his background gives so much context for his philosophy. He wasn't just some abstract thinker floating around.
No, absolutely not. He was a product of his environment, an aristocratic Athenian environment. He was born Aristocles around 428 or 427 BCE into an influential family. And interestingly, that nickname Plato, it apparently came from his broad physique. Plates, meaning broad in ancient Greek, could have been his shoulders or maybe even, his expansive intellectual style. We don't know for sure. But he received an exceptional, really well-rounded education. He excelled in everything from music and poetry to grammar, gymnastics, mathematics. Our sources even mention he participated in the Olympic and Nemean Games.
Wow, okay. That's not just a fun fact, is it?
Not at all. It highlights this holistic view of human development that would later become a cornerstone of his educational philosophy, especially for the leaders he envisioned. He believed in cultivating both the mind and the body.
That really shows how comprehensive his own formative years were. It wasn't just about being smart. Physical and artistic development were clearly key. Now, this brings us to what was arguably the most transformative encounter of his young life. His meeting with Socrates. Imagine a young, intellectually curious Plato, just captivated by Socrates' unique method. The Socratic dialogues. This wasn't a lecture, right, where a teacher just dumps knowledge on you.
No, not at all. It was this relentless process of questioning. An intense cross-examination designed to dig for deeper truths, to challenge every single preconceived notion, and, well, to expose the limits of your own understanding. Socrates famously said he knew nothing, didn't he? But through his persistent questioning, he often made others realize they knew far, far less than they thought they did.
That profound intellectual apprenticeship, though, it had a critical and ultimately a really tragic impact on Plato.
It really did. The Socratic method itself, seeking truth through rigorous collaborative questioning, profoundly shaped Plato's own approach to philosophy. No doubt about that. But it was Socrates' execution, his unjust execution by the Athenian democratic government, that truly shook Plato to his core. Our sources really emphasize this. That event deeply questioned Plato's faith in democracy. It forced him to witness what he saw as, essentially, mob rule by the ignorant.
Right, because Socrates, despite his wisdom, his virtue, was condemned by popular vote.
Exactly. And for Plato, that just highlighted the inherent flaws, the dangers of a system where truth and justice could be overturned by the passions and ignorance of the crowd. This experience became a key, really a driving force behind his lifelong quest to articulate an alternative, a more stable, more just form of governance. And that leads us straight into the Republic.
And what a blueprint it is. The Republic, written around 375 BC, it's not only Plato's most famous and widely read dialogue, but it's also this sprawling philosophical epic. It's far more than just a book about politics, isn't it? It touches on an incredible array of topics.
Oh, absolutely. Justice, power, the ideal state, yes. But also education, division of labor, mental balance, knowledge, even art gets a look in. It's incredibly comprehensive, almost an entire philosophical system packed into one text.
So to put it in context, how is it framed? What are the core questions driving it?
Well, the Republic is framed around two central, really interconnected questions that Socrates poses right from the beginning. First, what is justice? And he explores this on two crucial levels: what it means for an entire political community, like a city-state, and what it means for the individual soul. This dual inquiry is foundational because, for Plato, the just state is basically a large-scale reflection of the just individual, the macrocosm and the microcosm.
Okay, so justice in the city and justice in the person. What's the second question?
The second, equally driving question, which really gets to the heart of the dialogue's ethical core, is the just person happier than the unjust person? You know, does being good actually lead to a better life, even if the unjust person seems to get away with everything? These seemingly simple questions, they set the stage for everything that follows in this deep dive, guiding Plato's whole construction of his famous ideal state.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because to really grasp Plato's vision for his ideal state, we first need to understand his deepest philosophical conviction, his theory of forms. And here's where it gets really interesting, maybe a bit mind-bending, because this isn't just some abstract concept tucked away. It's the core of his identity as a philosopher, right? The very foundation upon which he builds everything else.
Absolutely. Plato believed in a higher reality, one that exists completely beyond what our ordinary senses can perceive. This reality, he argued, is made up of objective, eternal, ideal forms or ideas. Capital F forms.
So how are these forms different from, say, a chair I'm sitting on, or a beautiful sunset I see?
That's the crucial distinction. Plato distinguishes these forms sharply from the material particulars we encounter every day. Think about perfect justice itself. Not just a specific just law, which might be flawed or change, but the idea of justice in its absolute, perfect, unchanging essence. That's a form. Our sources tell us that forms are unchanging. They're immaterial, no physical substance. They're non-spatial, they don't exist anywhere in particular, and they're atemporal, outside of time. They are pure, simple, uniform. They just are what they are in their most perfect manifestation, like the blueprint for reality.
Okay, so forms are perfect, unchanging, non-physical blueprints. Then what about the world we actually live in? The world of chairs and sunsets and, everyday life.
Right. In stark contrast, the materia and particulars we experience in our physical world, like that specific chair, or that beautiful flower that will eventually wilt, or even a just act that people might debate, these things are constantly changing. They're complex, they can appear differently depending on your perspective, they exist in space and time, and crucially, they're always imperfect copies of those perfect forms.
Imperfect copies, like photocopies.
Exactly like that. The physical world, the one we perceive with our senses, suffers from what Plato calls a deficient way of being. Think of it like a blurry photocopy of a crystal clear original image. The photocopy partakes in the image, it shares some qualities, it resembles it, but it can never be the image in its full, crisp, perfect glory. That's what Plato means by a deficient way of being.
Yeah.
Our reality is always just a hazy echo, an imitation, never the original perfect form.
So the physical world is essentially a shadowy, flawed reflection of something far more real. That's quite a departure from how most people intuitively perceive reality, where what you see and touch is reality.
Precisely. And this leads us directly to what scholars often call Plato's two worlds doctrine. He makes this rigid separation between the realm of forms and the realm of sensible particulars. It's not just a theoretical division either. It has profound implications for how we understand knowledge itself. For Plato, true, fundamental reality resides in the forms, and knowledge real, certain knowledge, is knowledge of these forms. That's the highest kind of understanding you can achieve.
So understanding the physical world isn't really knowledge in the highest sense?
According to Plato, no. The physical world, being changeable and imperfect, can only be the object of opinion or belief. True knowledge requires stability and perfection, which only the forms possess. This separation is crucial. It asserts that genuine understanding isn't found in the fleeting, imperfect world our senses show us, but in that stable, unchanging realm of the forms, accessible only through intellect and reason. It's a fundamentally hierarchical view of reality and knowledge. One world is just inherently superior, more real than the other.
Okay, so if a true reality exists in this higher world of forms, and our senses only give us these imperfect copies, how do we actually gain knowledge? How do we access these forms?
Well, for Plato, true understanding isn't something passive. It demands rigorous intellectual investigation. It's definitely not about just relying on what your senses tell you at face value. Genuine knowledge, the really true kind, is reserved for those stable, unchanging forms. The physical world, because it's in constant flux, because it's imperfect and temporary, well, it can only ever be the object of opinion or belief. Doxa in Greek. You can think something about it, you can believe something, but you can't truly know it in that foundational, certain way, episteme.
But this raises a huge question, doesn't it? If our senses are so unreliable for getting at true knowledge, and the forms aren't in the physical world, how do we ever even begin to grasp them? Where does that knowledge come from?
That's where Plato introduces his fascinating doctrine of recollection, or anamnesis. It's a really interesting idea. His theory is that our souls are immortal, and prior to being incarnated in our bodies, they existed in this disembodied state where they actually saw the forms directly. They experienced perfect beauty, perfect justice, perfect goodness. So learning in this life isn't about acquiring totally new information from the outside. It's actually a process of recollecting or remembering this latent knowledge that's already within us deep down in our souls. Our experiences in the sensible world, seeing imperfect copies, can act as triggers, prompting us to remember the perfect originals we once knew.
Wow. So knowledge is like an internal awakening, a remembering, rather than an external acquisition. That's profound. And it explains his deep skepticism about the senses then. He genuinely believed the sensible material world is an unreliable source of information for ultimate truth.
Exactly. Think about it. It's constantly changing, it's complex, and it presents things prospectively. He used that great example. A straight stick looks bent when you put it partly in water. Your senses are telling you it's bent, right? But intellectually, you know it's straight. Your senses are deceiving you.
Right.
And then there's this concept he talks about, the compresence of opposites. What this means is that a sensible property type, like say large, can apply to one thing. An elephant is large compared to a mouse, but not apply to another. That same elephant is small compared to a mountain. Or something can be beautiful in one situation but not in another. For instance, a particular shade of red might be beautiful in a painting, but maybe not beautiful if it's, I don't know, the color of a wound.
Oh, okay, I see. The same property seems contradictory depending on the context.
Precisely. And this inherent contradiction, this relativity in the physical world, for Plato, leads to confusion. It prevents true, stable knowledge. It means the physical world just can't be the source of absolute truth. This is a huge challenge to empiricism, the idea that all knowledge comes ultimately from sensory experience. Plato's saying, no, the senses are flawed. Reason is the path to truth.
And this whole philosophical stance, this distrust of the senses and the assent to true knowledge, it's all brilliantly illustrated in probably his most famous passage, isn't it? The Allegory of the Cave.
Absolutely. It's a cornerstone of Platonism from Book 7 of the Republic. And Plato explicitly uses it to compare the effect of education and the lack of it on our nature. It's an incredibly vivid, powerful, and enduring metaphor. Let's really unpack it.
All right, let's try and picture this. Imagine people chained from childhood deep inside a dark cave. Their necks and legs are fixed, so they can only gaze straight ahead at the cave wall in front of them. That's their entire world. They've never seen anything else. Behind them, some distance away, there's a fire burning. And between that fire and the prisoners, there's a low wall, like a screen. And behind that wall, other people walk back and forth carrying various objects, statues or puppets of humans, animals, all sorts of things. The fire casts the shadows of these objects onto the well that the prisoners are facing.
Right. And any sounds made by the people carrying the objects, they echo off the cave walls. So the prisoners, having no other frame of reference, naturally believe these sounds are coming directly from the shadows themselves. For them, these flickering shadows are reality, the only reality they've ever known. They compete to identify them, they praise those who are quickest. They don't realize they're just seeing distorted, two-dimensional copies of artificial objects, let alone that those objects are themselves copies of real things outside the cave. Their entire world is an illusion.
Okay, so they're trapped in this world of shadows. What happens next in the allegory?
Now imagine one of these prisoners is suddenly freed. Perhaps their chains break, or someone releases them. The first thing that happens is the light from the fire behind them hurts their eyes. It causes pain, confusion. They'd struggle to even believe that what they now see, the fire itself, the objects casting the shadows, is somehow more real than the shadows they're used to. Their instinct would be to turn away, wouldn't it? Back to the familiar darkness.
Yeah, absolutely. The known illusion is comfortable.
Exactly. But suppose, Socrates says, someone were to drag this prisoner, forcibly, kicking and screaming, up a rough, steep path, all the way out of the cave and into the blinding light of the sun outside. They'd be angry, they'd be in pain, and initially, they'd be completely blinded by the overwhelming light. They wouldn't be able to see anything clearly.
It sounds like a truly traumatic experience, actually.
It is. It represents the difficulty of philosophical education. But slowly, gradually, their eyes would adjust. First, maybe they'd only be able to look at shadows outside the cave, cast by real trees and real people. Then they might start to see reflections in water. After that, they'd be able to perceive the actual objects themselves, the trees, the animals, the people. And eventually, after much struggle and continued adjustment, they could look up at the stars and the moon at night, and finally they could look directly at the sun itself, understanding it as the source of all light and life and visibility. Only then, Socrates suggests, is the freed prisoner truly able to reason about the sun and understand its nature.
So they've made it out into the real world, but the allegory doesn't end there, does it?
No, and this next part is critical. It's the philosopher's burden. The freed individual, now accustomed to the true light, the world of forms, feels a kind of moral obligation, a duty to go back down into the cave, to share their newfound knowledge and try to liberate their fellow prisoners.
Okay, so they go back. How are they received?
Well, upon re-entering the darkness, their eyes, now adjusted to sunlight, would be temporarily blinded again by the dimness. They'd stumble around, seem clumsy, maybe unable to properly identify the shadows on the wall anymore. They'd appear foolish and ineffective in that world of shadows.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. The remaining prisoners, seeing this, would naturally infer that the journey out of the cave had actually harmed the person, made them blind and foolish. They'd conclude that such a journey is dangerous, pointless, something to be avoided at all costs. And in a really chilling conclusion, Socrates suggests that these prisoners, if they were able, would mock the returning philosopher. And if anyone tried to free them and drag them out into the light, they might even try to kill that person.
Wow. That's incredibly stark. Preferring the familiar darkness, even willing to kill to protect it.
It's a powerful image, and it connects directly back to Socrates' own fate, doesn't it? Trying to lead people towards truth and being condemned for it.
Absolutely. So let's break down the symbolism clearly. The cave is...
The cave is the physical, sensual world we live in. The world of appearances, everyday opinions, common perceptions. The shadows are the illusions, the distorted copies of true reality that our senses give us the opinions and beliefs we mistake for genuine knowledge.
And the freed prisoner.
That's the philosopher, the one who undertakes the arduous journey of reason and intellectual investigation to ascend to the real world, the intelligible realm of the forms.
And the sun.
The sun represents the ultimate source of illumination and reality. It's the form of the good itself, the highest form, the source from which all other forms derive their existence and their intelligibility. It's the ultimate object of knowledge.
And the philosopher's burden, returning to the cave.
That's the duty to educate others, to try and guide them towards truth, despite the almost certain resistance, hostility, maybe even violence they might face from those who prefer their comfortable shadows. It's a profound, maybe even tragic metaphor for the role of enlightenment in society and the deep-seated resistance to it.
This allegory, it doesn't stand alone in the Republic, right? You mentioned connections.
That's right. It's intricately tied to two other crucial analogies Plato uses, forming this really cohesive picture of knowledge and reality. First, there's the analogy of the sun. Here, Plato explicitly compares the form of the good to the sun. Just as the sun makes physical objects visible and provides the power of sight, the form of the good illuminates the other forms, making them knowable, and provides the soul with the power of reason and understanding. It is, in essence, the ultimate cause of both reality and knowledge.
Okay, so the good is like the intellectual sun. What's the other analogy?
The other is the analogy of the divided line. This gives us an even more detailed map of Plato's hierarchy of reality and knowledge. Imagine a line divided into two main sections: the visible world, the realm of opinion, and the intelligible world, the realm of knowledge. Each of these sections is then divided again. At the very bottom of the visible world, you have images, shadows, reflections, corresponding to mere conjecture or imagination, ikasia. A step up, still in the visible world, you have the physical objects themselves corresponding to belief, pistis. Then you cross the line into the intelligible world. The lower part represents mathematical reasoning, geometry, things you understand through deduction from axioms corresponding to thought or understanding, dianoia. And at the highest level, the top section of the line, you have pure philosophical understanding of the forms themselves, attained through dialectic, grasping first principles like the form of the good. This is true knowledge or intelligence, noesis.
So the journey out of the cave
Directly parallels the ascent up this divided line. You move from the lowest level of conjecture, shadows in the cave, through belief, objects in the cave, then through mathematical understanding, first steps outside, finally reaching true knowledge of the forms and the good, seeing the sun. It all links together.
This whole system really hammers home Plato's deep skepticism about relying purely on our senses. That idea of the compresence of opposites seems key here too.
It is, because the physical world presents things in such contradictory ways, large and small, beautiful and not beautiful, just and unjust, depending on the context or comparison. Plato argues it inherently leads to confusion. It can't be the basis for the kind of absolute, unchanging knowledge he's seeking. True knowledge must be about things that are purely and simply what they are, without contradiction. And those things, for Plato, are the forms, accessible only through reason, perhaps aided by that process of recollection we talked about.
Okay, so given Plato's really profound ideas about reality, knowledge, the unreliability of senses, and the need for reason, it's perhaps no surprise that he had an incredibly radical vision for how society should be organized.
Absolutely. His political philosophy, especially as laid out in the Republic, constructs this theoretical city he calls Kallipolis, which literally means beautiful city or good city.
Now, it's really crucial to understand, isn't it, that this isn't meant as a practical blueprint for Athens or any existing city at the time.
Exactly. It's a just city in speech, as Socrates often calls it. A hypothetical model, a thought experiment designed primarily to illustrate what justice looks like on a large scale. By understanding justice in the city, Plato believes we can better understand justice in the individual soul.
And how does he see the state itself originating?
Well, stepping back for a moment, Plato saw the state as fundamentally natural. It arises because individuals are not self-sufficient. We're social creatures. We need each other to survive and flourish. We have different needs, different talents. This necessity leads directly to the idea of a division of labor, and ultimately to his concept of a tripartite society, a society divided into three distinct classes.
Tripartite, three parts, like the soul.
Precisely. He argues the structure of the ideal city should mirror the structure of the ideal soul, which he also divides into three parts. Each part of the city corresponds to a part of the soul, and each has its own specific function and virtue.
Okay, let's break down these three classes. Who's the top?
At the very top, corresponding to reason in the soul, the rational, calculating part are the rulers. And these aren't just any rulers, they are the famous philosopher-kings, or importantly, philosopher-queens. These are individuals identified through decades of rigorous training and innate talent. Plato says they possess a golden soul, one dominated by reason and intellect. In his view, they are the natural servants of the city-state. Their legitimacy to lead comes not from popular vote or inheritance, but from their inherent nature, their virtue, and their extensive education. They are the ones who, through that long ascent out of the cave, can access the world of forms and therefore know what is truly good, just, and beautiful for the city. They're intelligent, reliable, and crucially, they're expected to lead incredibly simple, austere lives, governing based purely on their knowledge of these forms, not for personal gain, ambition, or glory.
And you mentioned something earlier. They aren't bound by the laws they make. That sounds dangerous.
It does, doesn't it? And it's one of the most provocative aspects. Plato argues that because these philosopher rulers have perfect knowledge of the good, they don't need written laws to guide them. Their wisdom is the law. They will inherently know the right thing to do in any situation and act morally and justly. For Plato, written laws are just imperfect attempts to capture true justice, necessary for governing the less enlightened, but potentially restrictive for those who possess genuine knowledge.
Wow, okay. That requires immense faith in the ruler's perfection. Who's the next class down?
Below the rulers, corresponding to spirit, in the soul, the emotional, courageous, honor-loving part are the soldiers, also called auxiliaries or sometimes grouped with the rulers as guardians. These individuals are said to have a silver soul. Their souls are dominated by spirit, but it's a spirit trained and controlled to uphold the rational decisions of the philosopher-kings. Their primary duty is defense, protecting the state from external aggressors and also maintaining internal order, ensuring the producers obey the rulers. They need to be courageous, high-spirited, disciplined, gentle towards their fellow citizens, but fierce towards enemies. Importantly, they hold no economic or political power themselves. Their role is purely protective and executive, carried out in obedience to the rulers.
Okay, so rulers, reason, soldiers, spirit. Who makes up the third class?
And finally, forming the base of this social pyramid, corresponding to appetite, in the soul, the part driven by basic desires for food, drink, sex, money, are the workers or producers, artisans, farmers, merchants. They are said to possess a bronze or sometimes iron soul, dominated by their appetites and material needs. Their role is absolutely essential to produce all the goods and services the state needs to survive and function: food, clothing, tools, housing, everything. Unlike the other two classes, the producers are permitted to accumulate wealth, own private property, and have conventional families. Their appetites, while needing to be moderated, are seen as necessary drivers for economic activity.
So justice in the city, Callipolis, is what exactly?
Justice, for Plato in the context of the state, is essentially harmony and order. It means each of these three classes performing its own proper function, the one for which nature and education have suited it, and not interfering in the functions of the other classes. So the rulers rule wisely, the soldiers protect bravely, and the producers provide diligently. When everyone stays in their lane, does their job well, and works together under the guidance of reason, the rulers, the city is just and harmonious. And this external justice in the state, for Plato, is the perfect reflection of internal justice in the individual soul. Where reason rules, spirit upholds reason's decisions, and appetite obeys. That's the healthy, balanced, just soul, and by extension, the healthy, balanced, just state.
It sounds like a very rigid system, though. How is it decided who belongs in which class? Is it hereditary?
That's a great question. Plato emphasized education as the absolute key. It's the fundamental method for identifying individuals' natural capacities and aptitudes, and then assigning them to their proper class and function within the state. It's not strictly hereditary, although he does suggest children will often resemble their parents. The education system, especially for the potential guardians, rulers and soldiers, is incredibly rigorous, lifelong, and designed not just to impart skills, but to test character, intellect, and above all, devotion to the community's good.
And this education starts young.
Very young. And it's intensely controlled. In their childhood, potential guardians are exposed only to what Plato deems the right kinds of stories and music. Gods and heroes must always be portrayed as intrinsically good, rational, and courageous, never immoral, deceitful, or overcome by emotion or laughter. There's incredibly strict censorship enforced on poetry, art, songs, music. Anything Homeric that shows gods behaving badly is out. The aim is to shape their souls from the earliest age, promoting courage, temperance, and reason, and forbidding anything that might soften soldiers, encourage lamentation, portray weaknesses, or incite dissent.
Strict censorship. And this leads us back to that tricky point about truth, doesn't it? The noble lie.
Yes. The Geneion pseudos, often translated as noble lie or myth of the metals. This is related to the education and class system. Where truth-telling is generally promoted as a virtue, Plato, through Socrates, argues it is permissible, even necessary, for the rulers to use falsehoods or myths if they serve the good of the city. It's like a medicine they administer. The most famous example is the myth they would tell all citizens, that they were all born from the earth, making them siblings, fostering unity, but the god who fashioned them mixed different metals into their souls, gold for rulers, silver for auxiliaries, bronze or iron for producers. This myth is designed to make everyone accept their place in the hierarchy and the division of labor as natural and divinely ordained.
But the rulers know it's a lie, while telling everyone else to be truthful.
Exactly. The rulers, possessing true knowledge, are permitted to use this medicinal falsehood for the health of the state, to maintain social harmony and acceptance of the class structure. However, Plato makes it clear it is strongly immoral for the members of the other two lower classes to lie. It's a stark example of that hierarchical application of ethics we mentioned. The rulers operate from a perspective of knowing what's truly good for the whole, justifying means that would be forbidden for others. It's deeply controversial, raising huge questions about truth, power, and manipulation, even if intended for good.
Okay, let's talk more about the ruler's education. You said it was lifelong.
Incredibly long and demanding. It's a progressive curriculum designed to draw the soul away from the sensible world towards the intelligible realm of forms. up to age 20. It's a balance of gymnastics for physical fitness and courage, and music, which includes literature, poetry, harmony for shaping character and developing a sense of order and beauty. Careful selection of content here, as we noted. From 20 to 30, those who excel are selected for advanced studies in the mathematical sciences, arithmetic, plane and solid geometry, astronomy and harmonics. These subjects train the mind to think abstractly, to deal with unchanging objects and principles, acting as a bridge to philosophy.
A whole decade of math and science. Then what?
At age 30, the most promising individuals are selected for the pinnacle of intellectual training. 5 years devoted solely to dialectics. This is the highest form of philosophical reasoning for Plato. It's not just debate. It's a rigorous, systematic process of question and answer, testing hypotheses, uncovering assumptions, resolving contradictions, and ultimately aiming to grasp the first principles of reality, the forms, culminating in the form of the good itself. It's how one truly leaves the cave.
5 years of pure philosophy, and they're still not ready to rule.
Not yet. After mastering dialectic from age 35 to 50 for 15 years, they must return to the cave. They have to engage in practical political training, holding military commands and other state offices, gaining real-world experience, proving they can apply their understanding in practical affairs, and resist temptations. Only after successfully navigating all of this at the age of 50 are they considered fully capable, fully tested, truly knowledgeable, and fit to rule. They can then divide their time between philosophical contemplation, accessing the world of forms, and taking their turn governing the city.
Wow. That is an unbelievably long and rigorous path. And the selection process. How do they ensure these people are genuinely devoted to the city?
Throughout this whole process, there are constant tests. Guardians could potentially be selected from any class if they show aptitude as children, though Plato implies the classes will largely breed true. They are tested repeatedly through hardships, dangers, and crucially, through temptations of pleasure and pain, to gauge their unwavering loyalty and devotion to the community's welfare. The aim is to weed out anyone who might rule for personal gain, fear, or self-interest, ensuring only those truly committed to the advantage of all make it to the top.
Now, alongside this intense education, Plato proposed some really radical living arrangements for the guardians, didn't he? To keep them pure.
Radically radical, yes, especially for the ruling and auxiliary classes. To prevent any conflict between personal interest and public duty, to eradicate greed and envy, and to foster absolute unity, these guardians are to live entirely communally. This means no attachment to any material beings like gold and silver, no private property and private life. They live in shared housing, eat together in common messes, receive only basic necessities from the producer class as wages for their service. They're explicitly forbidden from even handling gold or silver lest it corrupt their souls. It's an extreme form of asceticism designed to ensure their complete focus on the state's well-being.
No private property, and no private families either, right? This is maybe the most shocking part.
It is. This is often called the most controversial wave of Plato's proposals, the one that generates the most pushback then and now. He argues that the guardians, both men and women, shall have their women and children in common. There are no separate private families among the guardians. Mating festivals are arranged by the rulers, potentially using that rigged lottery we mentioned, to pair the best guardians for reproduction, aiming for eugenic improvement. Children born from these unions are taken away immediately after birth to be raised collectively by state-appointed nurses and caretakers in communal nurseries. The system is designed so that no child will know his or her parents, nor will any parent know his or her child.
No one knows who their parents or children are. Why? What's the goal there?
The goal is absolute unity and the elimination of conflicting loyalties. Plato believed private families fostered selfishness, nepotism, and divisions within the ruling class. If all guardians consider all children of the appropriate age range as their own sons and daughters, and all guardians of the parental generation as fathers and mothers, then theoretically they will care for the collective good of all children equally. It aims to make the entire guardian class into one single, cohesive family, bound only by loyalty to the state, eradicating the disruptive forces of private attachments and interests. It's an extreme measure for social cohesion.
Extreme is right, but amidst all this intense control and communalism, there's a surprising element of equality, isn't there, regarding women?
Yes, and this is genuinely remarkable for his time. Despite these highly centralized and, frankly, intrusive social controls, Plato was strikingly progressive on gender equality and leadership. He explicitly argues that women, if they possess the same natural capacities and aptitude for reason and courage as men, can be also a member of the class of leaders and can lead the city-state if they are competent enough with their men counterparts. Women selected as guardians would receive the exact same rigorous mental and physical training as the men. This belief in gender equality and assuming political power based purely on merit and natural ability, not on sex, is incredibly forward-thinking for ancient Greece and remains relevant today. He saw no inherent intellectual or moral difference that would automatically preclude women from ruling.
Okay, so taking all this in the philosopher-kings, the rigid classes, the communal living, the censorship, what does this vision mean when we look at actual forms of government? Plato clearly wasn't a fan of democracy.
Not at all. He strongly advocated for an aristocratic form of government, in the literal sense of aristos, best, and kratos, rule by the knowledgeable, virtuous elite, his philosopher-kings. He was fundamentally deeply opposed to democracy. He viewed it essentially as mob rule by the ignorant, a system where decisions are based on fleeting popular opinion and rhetoric rather than wisdom and truth. He believed it inevitably leads to chaos, factionalism, poor decision-making, and ultimately degenerates into tyranny, as the demagogue eventually takes power by appealing to the crowd's base desires. His reasoning was simple. Not all members of the state are wise or knowledgeable enough to rule. Entrusting governance to the ill-informed masses, as he felt happened with Socrates' execution, would only lead to instability and injustice.
Did he critique other forms of government too?
Yes, he saw other forms as flawed deviations from his aristocratic ideal, each representing an imbalance in the soul of the state. He identified timarchy, or comocracy, like Sparta perhaps, as ruled by the military class, dominated by spirit and ambition rather than reason. He saw oligarchy as ruled by the wealthy few, dominated by the appetite for money. Both were unstable and unjust in his view, eventually decaying into worse forms. His ideal aristocracy was the only truly stable and just form because it was ruled by reason itself.
It's a powerful critique, especially coming from democratic Athens. And his influence, well, it's hard to overstate, isn't it?
Absolutely. Alfred North Whitehead famously quipped that the European philosophical tradition consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. Now, that's obviously hyperbole, but it captures the immense foundational impact he had. Whether subsequent thinkers embraced his ideas, modified them, or reacted strongly against them, they almost always had to engage with Plato. He set the agenda for centuries of philosophical inquiry in metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and political theory.
Where do we see his most profound influence, perhaps outside of pure philosophy?
Well, one really significant area is on Christianity. Platonism, or perhaps more accurately, Neoplatonism, deeply influenced Christian theology, particularly through major figures like Origen and, most famously, St. Augustine of Hippo. Key Platonic ideas resonated strongly. The emphasis on a transcendent spiritual reality over the flawed material world, the concept of the immortal soul distinct from the body, the idea of an ultimate perfect good or being. Socrates' focus on the rational soul, that our moral and intellectual life is more important than our physical existence, became absolutely integral to much of Western religious and ethical thought.
So, the idea of heaven, for instance.
The modern Christian concept of heaven as a purely spiritual realm, where souls exist in communion with God, a world of light and perfection. Yes, that aligns much more closely with Platonic and Neoplatonic ideas of a higher immaterial reality than, say, some earlier Jewish or Christian beliefs in a more physical, bodily resurrection on earth. St. Augustine, for example, was heavily influenced by Platonist writings before his conversion. He used Platonic concepts, like the idea of the good as the source of all being, to understand God. He worked to synthesize faith and reason, finding philosophical tools in Platonism to articulate Christian doctrines, even suggesting he found hints of the Trinity in their works. The emphasis on an eternal perfect realm beyond our flawed physical world has a strong Platonic flavor.
Interesting. And politically, the Republic must have cast a long shadow.
A very long and complex shadow. It served as a foundational text in political theory, especially during the Renaissance, and it continues to be debated furiously in universities and political circles today. However, this is also where we see some of the more problematic aspects of his legacy. Plato's utopian ideals, particularly the emphasis on collective harmony over individual freedom, the rigid class structure, the state control over education and reproduction. These elements have led some to see parallels or even direct influence on modern communism and totalitarianism.
Right, the idea of the state controlling everything for a perceived greater good.
Exactly. Thinkers point to the suppression of individual liberty, the intense censorship, the rule by an unaccountable elite, the use of propaganda, like the noble lie, the eugenic elements. These aspects resonate disturbingly with 20th century totalitarian regimes that prioritize the state above all else.
And this led to some strong criticisms, didn't it? I think you mentioned Karl Popper.
Yes, Karl Popper's critique in his mid-20th century book, The Open Society and Its Enemies, is perhaps the most famous and forceful attack. Popper labeled Plato's ideal state as fundamentally hostile to the open society, calling it proto-totalitarian. He slammed the extreme censorship, the rigid hierarchical structure, the elite rule without accountability, the eugenic practices, and the overall suppression of individual freedom and critical thought. Popper argued that Plato dangerously redefined justice, not as fairness or individual rights, but simply as keeping one's place, maintaining the stability of the hierarchical state structure above all else.
Other critics raise practical concerns too, right?
Many argue that Plato's utopia is simply impractical, perhaps psychologically naive. Can humans really suppress their desires for family, property, and personal expression to that extent? Critics suggest it couldn't sustain itself, especially in larger, more complex societies. There's also the concern that such a system, by rigidly defining roles and potentially stifling individual initiative and dissent, even with a meritocratic selection, could lead to stagnation or even a leadership of mediocrity, despite the elaborate education system. The question lingers. How much individual freedom and diversity should be sacrificed for an idealized, potentially brittle collective harmony?
So lots of criticism, some very serious, yet the Republic is still studied constantly. Why? Does it still hold relevance?
I think it absolutely does, despite all the valid criticisms regarding its utopianism, impracticality, and elitist or even proto-totalitarian elements. It remains a cornerstone of Western thought for a reason. Its core arguments about the importance of knowledge and virtue and leadership, about the idea that power should be wielded for the benefit of the governed, not for personal gain, about the need for a rational basis for governance, even his arguments for gender equality and leadership potential, these continue to be incredibly relevant. It forces us to ask fundamental questions about the purpose of the state, the qualifications for leadership, the relationship between individual good and collective good, and the very definition of justice. These are perennial questions.
And beyond philosophy and politics, his ideas have really seeped into culture, haven't they? Especially the allegory of the cave.
Massively. The allegory of the cave has had an enormous cultural impact, far beyond academic philosophy. It's such a powerful, resonant image. You see its direct influence in films like The Matrix, which is almost a modern retelling people trapped in a simulated reality, mistaking it for the real world, with a philosopher figure, Morpheus, offering the chance to escape.
Yeah, that's a great example.
And think about The Truman Show, where a man lives his entire life in an artificial world created for television, completely unaware. Or Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, depicting a society where knowledge, books, is destroyed and people are kept docile with superficial entertainment, another kind of cave. The allegory has resonated through countless other films, novels, plays, even songs. It taps into this deep-seated human intuition that maybe what we perceive isn't the whole story, that there might be deeper realities hidden from view. It shows how Plato's ancient ideas about perception, reality, illusion, and the difficult struggle for truth continue to captivate and challenge us today.
It really is amazing how an idea from nearly 2,400 years ago still provides such a powerful lens for exploring modern anxieties about media, technology, simulated realities, and the nature of truth itself.
It truly is. It constantly invites us to question the nature of our own cave, whatever form it might take in our contemporary world. #HagOutro.
So where does that leave us? We've taken a pretty deep dive into Plato's Republic, exploring this really radical vision for a just state ruled by philosopher-kings. We've seen how this entire structure is founded on his profound, maybe challenging theory of forms, and his very specific understanding of what constitutes true knowledge, access through reason, not the senses. From his, let's face it, controversial ideas on communal living and eugenics for the rulers, to his surprisingly modern views on gender equality and leadership. Plato's work absolutely continues to provoke, to inspire, and yes, to draw really sharp criticism, especially from those who champion individual liberty and democratic values.
I think the enduring power of Plato, and the Republic in particular, isn't just in the specific answers he proposed for his own time and place. Many of those answers seem unworkable or even abhorrent to us now. But the power lies in the fundamental questions he forces us to confront, questions that remain profoundly relevant today. What is justice, really, both for society and for an individual? Who should rule, and on what basis should they rule popularity, wealth, birth, or actual wisdom and virtue? And perhaps most critically, especially in our current age, how do we truly distinguish between appearance and reality? between fleeting opinion and genuine knowledge, between the shadows flickering on the wall and the true source of light. That challenge feels more urgent than ever, doesn't it?
It really does. Plato laid the groundwork for so much of Western thought, constantly challenging us to look beyond the surface, to question our assumptions, to strive for something deeper. So, as you go about your day, maybe consider this. Are you, in any aspect of your life, still watching shadows on a cave wall? Are you mistaking deeply ingrained opinions or cultural narratives for ultimate truth? And what would it take for you, for any of us, to start that difficult ascent, to turn towards the sun, to pursue genuine understanding, even if the journey is painful and the light is initially blinding?